Hi, everybody. My name's John Beryl. I'm a partner at Beryl and Watson Lawyers, and I do work with the MS Society and have done for more than 25 years now on lots of issues around superannuation, insurance, financial issues. And one of the issues that keeps popping up all the time, we get asked questions about all the time, is if I've got MS, can I travel? And what are the pitfalls in traveling with things like travel insurance, getting medical expenses covered, reciprocal agreements with foreign countries? Can I still get Centrelink payments? What about if I'm on insurance benefits? Do they continue while I'm overseas? All these sorts of issues keep popping up. So what we've done is we've developed this webinar to deal with some of the basic questions that people might have. And we'll run through it in the slides. And once we've done that, if there's any questions about it in the future, you just contact me anytime and we'll help you sort them out. Okay. So travel insurance, let's start with that. All right. That's the biggest one. I mean, people want to travel now. Everybody wants to travel. There's like 1 million people from Australia traveled overseas last year. And people with MS are no different. They want to travel. So travel insurance is a really important thing, as we know, because if you get sick overseas, that can be a problem. But so the question is often, can I get travel insurance if I've got MS? The answer is yes, you can. All right, but we need to dissect it. So first thing is there are two types of travel insurance. One's for non-medical cover, which is things like if your bag gets pinched off the carousel, if you get your stuff stolen overseas while you're at a train station, if there's cancelled flights, if there's damage to goods, that sort of stuff. That's non-medical cover. You can get that covered no problem if you've got MS. And the other one is medical cover. That's the crucial one, which is for overseas hospital expenses, overseas doctors, medical evacuation if you want to be medevac back to Australia if you get a bad injury whilst you're overseas. That's the one that's more controversial. So we'll deal with those as we go through. So as I said, non-medical cover, no problem. You should be able to get that covered, no problem at all. Medical cover, people with MS are able to get medical cover and claim for injuries and sicknesses associated with cost expenses which are unrelated to MS. So if you'll be covered for non-MS related problems. The problem is where you can get cover for MS related problems. So the way travel insurance gets people with chronic illnesses like MS or can create problems for them is that all travel insurance policies, and much as there are about 30 different types of travel insurance policies out there, they go down, they are reduced to about half a dozen insurance companies. They've all got different brands, but they're all basically the same formula. They're all hidden away in the fine print and whatever, but most travel insurance policies exclude what they call pre-existing conditions. So they say if the claim you're making is because of a condition that you had before you took out the policy, we don't cover it. But you can sometimes, that's the basic cover, but if you can apply to get cover for a pre-existing condition before you travel overseas, and there's no, and MS is in that category. Right, so if you're planning to travel overseas, if you've got MS, and you get the basic travel insurance policy document, it says we don't cover you for pre-existing conditions, you can nevertheless seek to get cover for your pre-existing MS. And the way to do it is you get a certificate from your doctor, ideally a specialist, a neurologist, to give the insurer confirmation about what the health problem is, MS, what your prognosis is, the risk of getting sick when you travel overseas, and if you're in remission from the condition or if you're asymptomatic, and what treatment you're under. Ideally, what you're looking for is the doctor to say that yes, you've got MS, yes, you may be under treatment, but the condition is well controlled and it doesn't represent an adverse risk or a significant adverse risk of getting sick and requiring a claim to be made whilst you're overseas. If you make an application for pre-existing cover, and you can do it, and the turnaround time on decisions on these things is usually pretty quick, can be as short as a month. If they say yes to the claim, great. If they say no, you've got rights of appeal and you should get advice on that. So if you're overseas, how do you make a claim? If you get crook, or if you lose, if there's, your bag gets pinched from the carousel, how do you make a claim? So most insurers have got international emergency contact numbers staffed by nurses and doctors who you can call. So if you get a travel insurance policy, they've got a number that you can call, and you'll get a response pretty much straight away, and they can offer advice on treatment you might require and what's required to claim. E.g., go to a doctor to get a form to be filled in for situations that are less serious. The doctor or hospital that you're dealing with will usually, while you're being treated overseas, will usually need to complete paperwork for a claim to be made. And the insurer has, under there's a thing called the General Insurance Code of Practice, got a maximum of 4 months to make a decision on a claim. But decisions are usually made very quickly. So, for example, on things like hospitalisation and being medevaced back to Australia, those decisions can be made pretty quickly. Right. So for non-medical claims, you've got to get proof of your loss or damage. So, for example, if you get bags pinched, or if you get, your wallet pinched while you're overseas, you should go to the police station, get a report done. I did it in New York when my wallet got pinched while I was up at the Empire State Building, and I went to the cop shop in this sort of Hill Street Blues type cop shop in New York, and it was a great experience there to fill in the form, and it was a great time. But anyway, so you've got to get some proof of loss so that when you come back to Australia, the claim can be made, etc. Okay, that's for non-medical claims. So if you've made a claim and the claim is rejected, or if it's been delayed, if the insurer's delaying a decision about whether they're going to cover you or not, you've got rights. And the rights are, there's a right of internal complaint called an IDR complaint. The insurer's got 30 days to respond to an IDR complaint, internal complaint. If they don't respond favourably, if they don't say, yep, at the end of that we'll pay you or we'll cover you, then you've got the right of appeal to a court or to the Ombudsman, it's a mob called AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, right? So the turnaround times on this stuff is relatively quick, right? Some insurers do drag their feet, and you can have to go through the internal complaints process or maybe to the Ombudsman, but usually that can be done once you come back to Australia. Everybody always asks me, which insurers should I go with? Who are the good ones and who are the bad ones? The answer is that's a movable feast. Some insurers are good at certain times and some are bad. The big issue is if you apply for cover for your pre-existing condition, just about all of them will say, we won't cover you for pre-existing conditions, okay? But if you apply for cover for your pre-existing condition, what they will usually do is they do this internal assessment, and it goes to their underwriter. And at various points in time, the underwriters are good, they're bad, they look more favourably, they look more unfavourably. But the big insurers in this area are mobs like Covermore, iCover, TravelX. There are a myriad of them. But as I say, they do funnel back down to only about half a dozen or so insurers. One big area where a lot of people get travel insurance these days is through credit cards, right? So, and credit card travel insurance can be free. Like, for example, I've got credit card insurance through the Commonwealth Bank, through the Commonwealth Bank card I've got, and it's free. So you don't actually have to pay for it, but you do have to tell them, you do have to notify them before you go that you're going overseas, and they will give you the cover for free. But then you got to look at the terms and conditions, because sometimes, particularly with these sort of free add-ons to credit card insurance or bank cards, the insurance is more restricted, or can be more restricted, than if you bought it normally through a travel agent. Okay. But always look for, what you're looking for is looking at the term for pre-existing condition, PEC. That's in amongst the whole policy wording, the 20, 30 pages, that's the key thing to look for, okay? Right, so one thing to look for if you've got a chronic condition such as MS, if there can be an issue about whether the insurer will cover you for your pre-existing condition. So say, if, for example, you apply and the insurer says no, or they give you cover but they'll double the premium with a premium loading, or they restrict the cover so that we'll only cover you for this, or we'll restrict the sum insured. One important thing to look for is what reciprocal healthcare arrangements do we in Australia as Australians have with overseas countries? Because if we've got reciprocal arrangements, it means that you can access usually hospital care without any cost to you, maybe also doctors as well. Now, There are 13 countries at last count that we've got, or 11 actually on this, that we've got reciprocal arrangements with. Now, they're countries such as the UK, Ireland, Italy, New Zealand. There's some of the biggies. A lot of the Scandinavian countries, we've got reciprocal arrangements with them, which is good for people like me who love going to Scandinavia. But the biggie is that the Americans, USA is not on the list, right? So we do not have reciprocal healthcare arrangements with the USA. And that's the biggie, because that's where the huge expense can be if you need hospitalization or medical treatment overseas. But if you go to the UK or Ireland, or if you're going somewhere and you get crook or whatever, get yourself to the UK by hook or by crook, or Ireland or Italy or New Zealand, etc., to avail yourself of the public health system in that country, because that can get you can get free treatment there. Okay, the other mob is travel agents, right? So a lot of people buy their travel insurance through travel agents. It used to be the case that just about everybody bought it through travel agents, but these days a lot of people do their traveling or arranging their traveling themselves online, and so you'll get the travel insurance through an online website with a product disclosure statement, which is 20 or 30 pages long. If you do it through travel agents, a travel agent, the travel agent can give you information about it. Sometimes that information is not perfect about what's covered and what's not. But the other thing is that travel agents also give you a measure of security about things like if overseas trips, if there's a delay in planes, if there's cancellations, that sort of stuff. And also importantly, what requirements there are from overseas countries for things like visas and COVID requirements, right? So it's less so these days, but certainly 4 years ago, or for a couple of years there were massive COVID restrictions imposed by countries that varied. Now, but travel agents they're experts in this stuff, or they're supposed to be, so they're supposed to give you the information about it. Now, visas, for example, is an interesting thing. I was on the complaints board of the travel agent. So if someone did the wrong thing, if a travel agent did the wrong thing, you complain to this consumer complaints mob, and I was on that as the consumer rep. And we used to see some complaints about travel agents not providing people with the warnings about getting those ETSA visas to go to the States, or to get other visas to go to other countries. That stuff's pretty important. And also that you've got to have your visa's got to be valid, or your visa's got to be up to date, that sort of stuff. So they can help you with that. If they don't do it, you've got rights of appeal and rights of redress, and the travel agent can cover potential losses you've got through this code compliance committee, which is the mob that I was on the board of, or on the panel of, right? Otherwise, you can also complain to the Department of Consumer Affairs in each state. They can give you advice and help about recovering stuff against travel agents, etc. COVID-19. So a lot of people think that travel insurers don't cover you for COVID. That's not right. They do. Now, there was a period of time in the early days of COVID where there was big controversy about what was covered or not. People were stranded overseas, stranded at borders, and did travel insurance cover that? A lot in the early days, everybody was sort of flying blind on this stuff. But travel insurers have now adapted to COVID-19, and they all do cover, or most of them do cover COVID-19, right, related claims or related losses. But the cover does vary. Some insurers only cover medical transportation costs if you contract COVID while you're overseas, or you're diagnosed when you're overseas, right? Some policies do include cancellation costs, so before you travel, but often they'll say that the COVID must have been contracted X number of days after the insurance starts. So an important thing there to do is that when you book your ticket, get your travel insurance so that if before you travel you get COVID and you get crook and you can't travel, then the travel insurance can cover that. All right. Also, one other thing is that they're not very good at is a lot of policies don't cover border closures. Now, that's not so much a thing now. It certainly was in the early days of COVID. It's not so much a thing now, but it can be. Who knows where the next wave is going to happen. And also some policies restrict cover for cruises. Like, I think we all remember the Ruby Princess in Sydney back in the early days. So, I mean, those days the bad old days are sort of behind us, but, you never know. So COVID-19, yes, it's covered. There are some limitations on it. And I'll tell you in the end where to get advice on all this stuff. All right. So another question that people often ask is, I'm on Centrelink payments. So what happens to my Centrelink payments when I'm overseas? Okay. Let's start with the disability support pension. If you're on the DSP, you can get the DSP for up to 28 days in any 12-month period you travel overseas, right? So in other words, if you're going on an overseas trip, if it's less than 28 days from start to finish, your DSP will continue. If it's more, your DSP will stop for that beyond the 28 days, right? When you come back to Australia, your DSP may be reinstated, and the operative word there is may. But Centrelink, which is now called Services Australia, may require you to reapply, which can be a real problem because DSPs are hard to get, right? If you've been on the DSP for a long time and you got it in before they made the changes back in 2011, if your DSP was to be cancelled or you had to reapply for it, that can be a problem. If you got it in the last 10 years where you had to satisfy the high bar to get on the DSP, maybe it's not such an issue. But as someone who works in the area of Centrelink benefits and disability support pensions, it ain't easy to qualify for it. So you wouldn't want to do anything that's going to put it at risk. The path of least resistance on that is don't go overseas for more than 28 days. Because if you do, there can be a risk that your DSP might stop, right? You just need to be aware of that if you are going to travel for more than that period of time. Right. You can get the DSP for a longer period, but there are restrictions on it. One is you've got to be assessed as under what they call the manifest grants provisions of the DSP, which are really tight. So, for example, if you've got a terminal illness, if you're on the Veterans Affairs pension and a few other things, right, you will sort of automatically qualify as getting it for more than the 28 days. If you move to a country that's we've got a social security agreement with Australia and the UK equivalent, such as the UK, yes, some European countries and New Zealand, and you got to check the website, Services Australia website for the list of cases. But it's not easy to get that extension, right? So if you're on the DSP, it's always a good idea to let Services Australia know before you head overseas. And appeals relating to the decision of Centrelink, if they make a decision to suspend your payments or stop your Centrelink payments, you can get there. You've got appeal rights. They're not great, and it's best to avoid those sort of blues. But if you get locked into that sort of blue, we'll then get advice on it. Talk about that at the end. Job seeker. If you're overseas, your job seeker payments will stop immediately, right? So DSP, 28 days. Job seeker, they stop immediately. When you return, you notify Services Australia immediately, and they'll decide whether to reinstate your payments. They should, and they usually do, but if they don't, appeal rights, etc. Okay. Disability insurance and travel. So if you're not on Centrelink payments, but for example, you're on income protection payments through, whether that be through your superannuation or if you've got private insurance, and you're on monthly payments for your disability, the question is, what happens if you travel overseas? Do the payments continue or do they stop? So it can be or if you've got a claim pending for monthly payments or for a lump sum for a total and permanent disability, what happens to the claims whilst you're overseas? These are questions. Okay, so to be eligible for disability insurance, you'll have to lodge a claim, and including medical reports and certificates. A problem can be if you're already on income protection payments and you've usually got to provide progress report forms, whether it's monthly, 3 monthly, or 6 monthly. If you're overseas, that can be a problem, right? Because you've got to provide report form from a doctor. The doctor's here. Your doctor will probably be used to filling in the form. They might think it's a bit of a pain in the bum, but they'll do it, right? If you're overseas, that can be harder. I've seen many examples of people trying to get doctors overseas to fill in these things. They're just not used to it. Or if it's in a country where English isn't the primary language, that can be very problematic because you get something that's not in English, it's then got to be interpreted. So most policies, when you're on the monthly payments, they do allow for you for payments to continue whilst you're overseas. Some of them put a restriction on it, might be 3 months, etc. But most of them will allow you to keep getting paid overseas. But it's these logistical issues about getting the progress report forms from doctors or filling in the progress report form yourself. That can be problematic. Okay, but it's not impossible. So, for example, with your doctor, you might even be able to do it remotely. With these days with telehealth and things like that, you might be able to speak to your GP and have a telehealth appointment while you're overseas to get your GP then to fill in the form for the progress report form, etc. Okay. All right. So travel tips. Let's talk about some things. So you should always check yourself what the entry and exit visas are for each country you're visiting overseas, right? So the USA, you're going to get those ETSA travel visas. In some countries overseas, you've got to have the visa. You've got to have the visas as well. Most European countries, it's 90 days? It's not a problem. Beyond that, it can be an issue, right? So check their entry visa well before you travel, okay? Also, your passport, right? As I said before, with some countries, your passports go for 10 years in Australia, but it's really important that the passport will still be current for the period of time that you're overseas. In some countries, if your passport's due to expire within 6 months, then they won't let you in, or they won't let you into the country. So always have your check to see your passport's current and will well and truly cover you for the period that you're overseas and then some, right? Get travel insurance, right? You really can't travel without travel insurance. You can't travel overseas without travel insurance, particularly if you've got a chronic illness like MS, right? Some countries will actually require you to have travel insurance before you can come into the country, but make sure you get travel insurance before you travel. And also make sure you've arranged accommodation before you arrive, because you can be caught out. If you arrive in a country and you fill in the entry form, unless you can give them an address that you're staying at before you arrive, or when you arrive, they won't let you in. They'll kick you out. So you can't just turn up to a country and then say, I'll go and find an Airbnb when I arrive. You got to pre-arrange your first period of accommodation before you get there. That's a travel tip. All right. So a lot of this stuff is about travel insurance, what you're covered for, what you're not covered for. And I've been saying, well, okay, you look at the fine, you got to look at the terms such as pre-existing condition, applying for extra cover, whether you're covered for medicals, whether you're covered for other things like, extreme sports, that sort of stuff. And the answer to that is buried away in the fine print in these policies. Now, the policy documents, if you get it through a travel agent, they'll give you one of those fan-filled thingos, or they'll give you directly to the online thing that they send you. Or if you buy it online, you get the thing called a PDS, the product disclosure statement, which is like 20, 30, 40, 50 pages long. And whilst it is always important for you to check the fine print, I don't expect people to actually do that or understand it or navigate their way through it. So it's really important you get advice about this stuff. So if you've got any questions about it before you travel, or if you've traveled and you're looking at making a claim and you're having troubles with the insurer, get advice. And we give free advice to the MS Society, have for 25 years now. So if you've got any questions about what travel insurance you've got, what you're covered for, what you're not, what reciprocal arrangements you've got with countries overseas, I know the answers to this stuff. You can contact us. We will give you the advice. We'll check what you've got. We'll check what you can get. We'll do it when it doesn't cost you anything for us to do that. Happy to help you, right? So just give us a call anytime or drop us a line by email or whatever, okay? If anybody's got any questions, now or in the future, let us know. Otherwise, safe travels and have a great time. See you later.